This is a detailed overview of the Pocket Toolpath strategy, where we're going to look at all of the options in the form and show the effects of the different settings that you have on the toolpaths that you create. So let's just go to File, Close. So let's start by opening an existing file. So from the project folder, we're going to open the Pocket Toolpath Example 1. And here we've got a set of simple vectors that we're going to use to demonstrate the Pocket Toolpath. So let's switch over to the Toolpaths tab, and the first thing that we should always do is check over your material setup. So here we've got a thickness of 1/2 inch, XY datum position 0, 0 is in the lower left hand corner, Z0 is on the material surface, and then the rapid Z gaps above the material, so your clearance and plunge settings seem appropriate. Home start position and the Z gap above the material also seem safe there as well. So let's just go ahead and we'll press OK. So the Pocket Toolpath allows you to take whatever vectors that you've got selected and machine inside of those to clear the material out to your specified cut depth. So to demonstrate to begin with, let's just select this square here. And then we're going to go over into the Pocket Toolpath, which can be found under the Toolpath operations, and it's this icon here. So starting at the top of the form, we have the cutting depths. So we have to specify a start depth and a cut depth. Now, as we're starting this at the top of our material, we're going to leave the start depth at 0. And you'd change this if you had already cut into the material prior to running this toolpath, and then you'd set the start depth to the value that you've already cut into. And you specify your cut depth. So this is how far into the material we want to machine. So for this example, let's say we want to cut in 1/4 inch. Next up, we need to specify the tools. Now, we currently have nothing selected, so we need to get a tool from the tool database. To do this, we can use the select option, and that will open up our tool database. And then here we can open up the Imperial tools, and then we can select a tool from the list. So here we'll take the 1/4 inch end mill. And you can see within the tool database, we're able to see all of the different geometry, cutting parameters, and feeds and speeds that we currently have set for this tool. And then we could go ahead and press select. And you'll see now it's been imported into our tools list for this Pocket Toolpath. And then if we wanted to remove the tool from the list, we can use the remove option. Over to the right, we've got an option to edit the tool, and this will edit any of the parameters that we've got set for the tool itself, so the geometry, cutting parameters, feeds and speeds, and it will only alter it for this particular toolpath, and it won't affect the data that exists for that tool in the tool database. So here we're displayed the tool diameter, number of flutes. If we take a look at the cutting parameters, we have the pass depth, and you can see at the moment that's at 1/8 inch. And so the pass depth is the amount of Z that the tool can travel through the material safely in order for it to cut it. So we're just going to change that from from 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch. And so we know that we've told the software we want to cut 1/4 inch, so what would happen is our toolpath is going to cut this out in one pass at that 1/4 inch there. Next up, we have the Stepover. So the Stepover is the horizontal distance between each pass that the tool is going to take, and we'll have a look at the effects of that in a moment. Okay, and then we've got feeds and speeds. Now, this tutorial guide is just to demonstrate the Pocket Toolpath, so we're not going to worry about this section. However, if you were to cut this, you would need to check the settings and ensure that they're safe for your setup and application. So in this case, we're just going to go ahead and then press OK. Then here you can see that we displayed the number of passes that this tool is going to take to complete this cut, and we can see it's at 1. We know that because we edited the tool so that the pass depth of the tool was 1/4 of an inch, which is the same as the total cut depth that we want to cut this pocket at. So that's why we're seeing the value 1 there, and we can edit these passes, but we'll look at that later on in this tutorial. Next up, we have 2 options for the actual strategy. We can cut this in an offset strategy or a raster strategy. Now, the offset actually follows the shape of the vectors, as you can see demonstrated in this graphic here. And then the raster strategy enables you to go back and forth with the option to then add in a profile pass to clean that up. We're just going to look at the offset strategy to create this pocket for this example. Working our way down the form, we have the option to apply a ramp plunge move. And so what this does, it means that as the tool is entering into the material, that it will use a diagonal move rather than a straight vertical move. And in some cases, with certain tooling, this can actually help reduce the wear of the tool. Okay, so then you can give your toolpath a name, so you can just type in pockets, for example, and then simply go ahead and press calculate, and then the software will automatically open up the preview toolpaths form, and we're automatically in the 3D view as well, and this is where we can then preview that toolpath. Okay, so we're just going to zoom in on the actual toolpath here in the 3D view. And so if you take a look at these lines, you can see that the distance between each of these toolpaths is defined by the Stepover, which we got set up for the tool. And we'll look at that in a moment. Now, if we take a look at this up the y-axis, you can see that it's actually being cut on a single level, and that's because the pass depth matched the cut depth of the pocket, and so it's cleared that all in one single pass. So let's just pop that back in Z, and then if we go to the global fill color, and then we can just change that to a green color, for instance, and then we could look at previewing that. So we're just going to slow down the preview speed here by using this slider. Okay, and then we can just go ahead and preview that. So you can see it's cutting that out in an offset strategy from the center, and it's working its way out. And then if we speed that up, we can see the finished result of that toolpath. So you'll notice that the corners of our pocket have a rounded edge, and that's due to the radius of the tool, and there really is no way to avoid this other than using smaller and smaller tools to try and reduce this effect. Now, this only is really important if you're inlaying a sharp object into a pocket like this, and that's dealt with using the auto inlay toolpath strategy, which is covered in another video, and we'll put that in the related videos section for this tutorial. Okay, so let's just reset that preview, and then we're just going to switch on the visibility of that pocket toolpath, close out of the preview form. We're going to use this option here to edit the toolpath, and that will take us back in to the pocket toolpath. Okay, so now we're going to look at editing the tool parameters, and we're going to see the effects that it has on the toolpath. So we're going to keep the same cut depth of 1/4 of an inch, and we're going to use the same 1/4 inch tool as well, except this time we're going to edit the tool for this toolpath. And so you can see we've got the pass depth where we set that to 1/4 of an inch, where it was able to cut that in one pass because it matched the cut depth that we've got set in the form. Let's see what happens when we halve that and we put the pass depth here at 1/8 of an inch. Then we could simply go ahead and press OK. And then if we hold down Control whilst we press Calculate, what that does, it shows us the result of that toolpath without opening the toolpath preview form. So we can continue to make edits within this form if we needed to. Okay, so let's just have a look at this up the y-axis there. And we can see that we've got 2 step down levels. So we've changed the pass depth for this tool to be 1/8 of an inch. And so it's cutting a total cut depth of 1/4 of an inch. And it's going to do that in 2 passes. One at the first 1/8 of an inch, and then the second at the second 1/8 of an inch, which is a total of 1/4 of an inch. So let's just pop that back in the z-axis, and now what we're going to do is we're going to look at editing the Stepover. So if we go back into the edit option over here, and then we'll just adjust the pass depth and put that back to 1/4 of an inch so that we do that in one pass. But then we're going to look at adjusting the Stepover. So this is the distance horizontally between each one of these passes. So at the moment we're currently at 40%. So let's just take a look at the effects of this if we was to pop this at 0.02. And you'll see that as I've updated that field, the percentage field is also updated to show us what the percent of that is, which is 8% of the tool's diameter. Okay, so then we could go ahead and press OK, and then again if we go ahead and just control and calculate that, we can see that we are presented with a much denser set of lines here, and that's because we've decreased that Stepover so it's much smaller, and so the distance between each one of those moves is a lot less, and you can see the result of that there. Okay, so let's just have a look at another example. So we'll just pop that back in Z, and then we go into the edit options here. Okay, so we've looked at a small value here. Now let's just increase this to 80%, for instance. So that is a Stepover of 0.2. And then we could go ahead and then press OK. And again, let's just use this option here to control and calculate that. And so you can see that we have a much larger distance between each of these passes. And you'll also see that the software has actually added on these tails, and it's done that so that it doesn't leave any upstanding pieces of material in each one of these corners. So that's pretty much the effect of pass depth and Stepover for this tool. So let's just go into the edit options, and we're just going to change those settings back. So we're just going to put the Stepover there to 0.1, and then we'll just press OK, and then we'll use the control and calculate option there. And now we're going to look at exploring the effects of changing the strategy or the pattern in which we cut our pockets out with. So far we've demonstrated the pocket toolpath using the offset strategy. So now we're going to look at the raster strategy, where the tool will actually just go back and forth to fill out that shape. You can see at the moment we have a raster angle of 0. So what that means is that the long moves will be parallel to the x-axis. You can see we also have an option to specify a profile pass. It's currently at no profile pass. We have first and we have last. And we're going to look at these in a second. So let's just take a look at the effects of this toolpath using the raster strategy, where we've got a raster angle of 0 degrees. So we'll go ahead and press calculate in this case. And we can see the toolpath is going from the right over to the left. It's going to go up, and then it's going to go right, and so on. Okay, and so it's going up by this Stepover. So let's just preview that. So we'll just slow that down, or preview that so you can see it's going from the left then to the right, and it's just working its way up. And if we just increase the speed there, we can see the effect of that. So if we take a look at this in the ISO view, and then if we just zoom in ever so slightly, so you'll notice that where we've cut the pocket with that 40% Stepover, and in this raster strategy, we're actually left with quite a lot of cusping. And that's because we are using a round tool. Now that's okay, but we might want to make this a nice smooth edge that follows the actual vector, and that's where the profile options can help. So if we put that back in Z, and then if we just go ahead and just reset that preview, we're going to double click to go back in here. And so if we go to the profile pass, currently we're on no profile pass, and we have the option to choose first and last. Now you do get the same result from this. This is more to do with the type of material that you may be cutting. Some materials will benefit from having the profile cut first so that they don't chip when doing the raster pattern, and then others benefit from running the profile pass last. So it's really down to your material type. So in this case we'll just go with the last here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and then we'll just press calculate. Okay, so we'll just put that in the ISO view and we can zoom in here. So we can see we've got that raster pattern. You can also see we've got a path that basically follows the outer edge of that square. And so if we just slow that down and then preview that, you can take a look. We'll just speed it up for the raster. You can see it's just going back and forth. And then as it will get to the top, it's going to come around to do the profile. And you can see now we are left with a much smoother edge there. Okay, so that's pretty much that. So let's just pop that back in Z. And then we'll just reset that preview, switch on the pocket toolpath there, and we'll double click to go back in to that pocket toolpath. And then what we can look at now is the angle of our cut. So we're currently looking at an angle of 0 degrees. And so what this means is that it's parallel to the x-axis, what we're seeing there. If we wanted that parallel to the y-axis, we can simply change that by typing in 90 degrees here. And if we just press Control and calculate, we can see the result of that. And you can see we'll start here, it's going to come down and go back on itself, up and down, like the pattern that you can see here. Let's say, for instance, you wanted to do a 30-degree angle. We could simply put in 30 degrees in there and then press Control and calculate, and we can see that that is 30 degrees from the x-axis, and you can see the result of that there. Okay, so let's just set the angle back to 0 here, and then we'll just go ahead and then press Control and calculate. Now the software offers us with two options for the cut direction when we're using the raster strategy with a profile pass and when we use the offset strategy, and that's the cut direction, whether we choose climb or conventional. Now, to learn more about this and to find out which option would be best for the application that you're using, you can research these methods online, and I personally think it's worth investigating the benefits of either of these choices. And the next option that we have in the form is the ramp plunge moves, and that's whether we choose to add a ramp entry move or not. And so if we check that, what that will do is it will allow us to apply a diagonal move into the cut, and this just stops you vertically cutting in with the tool. Some tools don't have a good cutting face when moving vertically downwards, and so by adding in this ramp or this diagonal move, it just lessens the wear and tear of the tool. So here we could just put in a distance, for example, of 1 inch, and then if we use the option to control whilst we calculate that, then we can take a look at the effects of that. So let's take a look at that down the y-axis. Okay, so we can see that the tool's going to travel over here, and then it's going to come down, and then it's going to come in at a diagonal over 1 inch, and then it's going to come back on itself, and then it's going to begin cutting that tool path out on that single level, because we've got a pass depth that's at 1/4 inch, and that diagonal horizontal move is just really just gonna, like I said earlier, it's just going to help take the stress off the tool, and so really it just helps with your tool longevity. Okay, so we'll just pop that in Z. And then what we'll do is we'll just take the ramp plunge moves off this time. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the effects of using multiple vectors to create pockets where we have vectors sat inside of other vectors. So we're just going to tile our windows, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to close out, we're just going to undraw this toolpath here. And then we're just going to simply select all of those vectors just by drag selecting there. And then we're going to go into the pocket toolpath. So we're just going to go with the same settings that we've used before, just switch off the ramp plunge moves, and then we'll just go ahead and then press calculate. Now, when we have vectors within other vectors, what the software will do is it will machine between the first two vectors, and then it will leave a gap before machining the next one. So if we take a look at in our 2D view, we can see it's going to machine between this vector and this vector here, and it's going to pocket that away, then it's going to leave a gap, and then once it gets to the next vector, it's going to machine in between that vector and the text vector. Okay, if we take a look at the circle, we've got the circle vector, it's machining everything in between the circle and the star, then it's going to not touch anything, then it's going to go into the star, and then the circle, and then it's going to machine inside of the circle there. So let's just preview that to see how that looks. We'll just speed this up for the square. And then we can see as we're slowing that down, it's machining everything between the outer circle and the star. And then it's just doing that profile pass just to clean that up. And you can see the effect of that there. And then you can see it's going to cut in and do the circle. Okay, so for the text, so it's machining everything between this inner vector here and the text vector. And it's going to complete that, and then it will come onto the outside and machine away the outer border. And so the software will do all of the hard work for you in deciding which side of the vector the toolpath is going to machine on to create the series of pockets. So let's just go back into that toolpath and we'll look at the effect of what happens if we deselect some of those vectors. So for example, if we go ahead and if we just deselect this vector here, and then if we deselect the star there, and then just go ahead and calculate that, we'll just reset that preview. You can see what's happened here. So for the text, it's machining between these two vectors, and then the next selected vector is the text, and so it's just going to machine everything inside there. For this one, it's got the circle, and then the next vector is the inner circle, and so it's machining everything between those two vectors. So it's very important to select the right number of vectors and make sure that you have additional vectors on the outside if you need to change the order that this is going to pocket them in. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to reset this preview. We'll just close out here. Actually just going to delete this toolpath. We're just going to double click on our first toolpath that we created. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to select all of the vectors here, and we're going to look at how we can control the number of Z levels that we create when we cut the toolpath by using the edit passes option. Now, previously we've been doing this by using the edit option to edit the tool parameters for this toolpath, whereby we input a pass depth. And so what the software is doing is it's dividing up the depth of cut using this pass depth as a maximum that it shouldn't exceed. And so at the moment it's at 1/4 inch, which is cutting at 1/4 inch. If we change that now to 0.1 and then press OK, we can see that the software is telling us that that's going to machine this in 3 passes. And we can look at editing these passes. So let's just use the edit passes option. And you can see what happens now is it opens up a form where we can be very specific about the depths of cut to apply to this toolpath. So we can see at the top of the form we've got the total depth of cut at 1/4 inch, and that value is actually pulled by our cut depth that we set here in the pocket toolpath. You can see the pass depths indicated by these different values here. You can also see this graphic on the left hand side, so the beige colour represents our material thickness, and then each one of these lines represents a pass depth. So this one here represents 0.0833. This one here represents 0.1667, and then at the very bottom, if we click on the bottom there, you'll see that will highlight there. So we can interactively select each one of those pass steps by selecting the actual line, or we can actually select the actual value from the box that we've got here. So where have these numbers come from? So by default, what the software has done is it's looked at the pass depth that we've set for that tool, so 0.1 there, and then it will look for a number that it can divide the depth of cut equally into, that will make sure that each depth of cut is below the value that we set. So here what we're getting is we're getting passes which are at a depth of 0.0833 inches, and we're doing that on a per pass basis. So in some cases you still may want to maintain that pass depth and not divide the part up equally, in which case you can come down to this section here to maintain exact tool pass depth. And if we check that option on, you'll see now that the software is telling us that at 0.1 inches, what's going to happen is we're going to have two passes at 0.1 of an inch per pass, with a final pass at 0.05. And if we use this option here to set those passes, you can see that our graphic is updated here along with the values that we can see there as well. So we can uncheck that option and then just set those passes back to the default settings that we had originally. Now we can look at adding in new passes. We can do that by using this section here. So currently we can see that we have 3 passes in there. And then what we can do is we can increase that to 4. And you'll notice that the graphic has updated. So we now have 4 passes visible. We can see 4 values there, and we can see the exact depths that these are going to be machined at. Again, we can go up and we can increase those, and again you'll see that those graphics have been updated along with the list of the pass steps that we can see there as well. And so we can take that back down to 4, and what the software is doing is it's just dividing that up equally into 4 passes, and so it's doing each one of those passes at a depth of 1/16 of an inch. We have the option here to set a last pass thickness. Now this will define the depth of cut for the final Z level. For example, if we check that option there, we can say we wanted to put in 0.02, and then we could simply press apply here, and then you'll see that what it does is it's added an additional level here, so that we're only cutting 0.02 of an inch on our final pass, and this can be helpful in some materials from a finishing point of view and to reduce the load on the last pass. Or if you're cutting all the way through the material, then it can be helpful to make sure that it's holding the part in place, but making sure that you are not loading the tool up too much when you do that final pass. So we're just going to uncheck that option there. We're just going to look at some more things that we can do within this form. So we can look at deleting passes if we wanted to. For example, let's take this pass and we say we wanted to delete it. We could look at editing a pass. Let's say we wanted to take this one and we actually wanted to make that 0.15. We can do that by just typing the value in there and then using the option to apply, and you'll see it's updated along with the graphic as well. So lots of control over the individual passes that we've got here. Okay, so we're just going to kind of reset this. So we're just going to clear all passes and use this option here to set the passes, so back to the original 3 passes that we saw right at the start. So we'll just go ahead and we'll press OK. So with these settings, let's just go ahead and we'll just press calculate, and then we'll just preview the result of our setup there and take a look at what we've got here in the 3D view. Okay, so we can see that the tool isn't quite getting in between the X and the T and the E and the X over here. Now, if I wanted to cut in between these characters, so then what we could do is we could look at increasing the spacing between the text characters. But if I wanted to keep this text as it is, then I could simply look at using a smaller tool that will actually fit in between those characters. So just switch on the toolpath visibility here, and we're just going to go over to the solid view and toggle that from this option here. You can see that everything that we're going to machine away is purple. And so if we zoom in, we can see it's actually not getting into those areas. We've got this cusp in. So hopefully a smaller tool will enable us to actually get in there. So we'll just press F to fit that to our screen. And we're just going to double click to go back into that toolpath. So we're just going to take that tool, we're just going to remove it. I'm going to select a tool and use the 1/8 inch end mill from the list, and then we'll go ahead and then press calculate. So let's just reset that preview, and then what we'll do is we'll just go in and then preview this toolpath. And you can see now that it's actually managed to machine in between each of those characters much better. But obviously, because we are using a smaller tool, it'll just mean that it's going to take a longer time to actually machine this than if we was using the larger tool. And this is where we could look at the option to use multiple tools, where we can use a large tool to clear out the majority of the pocket, and then a smaller tool to just get in at all of the gaps that the larger tool couldn't fit into. So let's just reset that preview. We'll just double click to go back into the pocket toolpath. And so to select another tool, all we do is use the select option. So we already have an 1/8 inch end mill in our tools list. So if we use the select option, we can choose that 1/4 inch end mill, press select, and you'll see that it's automatically shifted itself to the top of the list because it's the largest tool. And so we know that we're going to be machining with the larger tool to begin with, and then we're going to clear up any areas that that large tool couldn't get to using that 1/8 inch end mill. So let's go ahead and calculate that. And so you can see we're presented with two toolpaths in our toolpath list. We have pocket brackets clear 1, and that's using that 1/4 inch tool to basically clear the majority of that pocket out where it can. And then we have a second toolpath called pocket, and that's using that 1/8 inch end mill. So let's just take a look at both of those separately. So pocket clearance, that's using that 1/4 inch tool. We can see by looking at our solid preview over here, as we saw earlier, we can't get that tool in between the X and the T. Also can't get it quite close enough into the corner of the X on the top and the bottom there. We can't get it in between the E and the X here. And so we're already well aware of that, but it can clear the majority of everything else using that larger tool. Then if we just undraw the visibility of that one and just switch on the visibility of the pocket toolpath, that's using the 1/8 inch tool, you can see that it's not concerned with all of this blank area here. Everything that you can see that's pretty much white, it's not concerned with because we've already machined that away using that 1/4 inch tool. All it's concerned with is getting to the areas that that larger tool could not get to. And so you can see, looking at the 2D view here, that we're getting much closer to those characters. We're getting in between the characters there, and that's all with the help of using two tools to do this. And so what that would look like is we'd have our clearance tool, which would go around and clear that out, and then we're going with our pocket 1/8 inch end mill, and then we could go ahead there and then clear that out, and you'll see that we've got a much better result here. Now we are using two toolpaths here, so there is obviously going to be a tool change, and so it's all dependent on really, how you want to machine this. Is your time better spent using a smaller tool and you just use one single tool, or is it better spent doing a swap out and doing it a little bit more efficiently by having a larger tool hog out the majority of the material and then swap out the tool for a smaller one to get in at all of the intricacies that that larger tool could not get to? Okay, so we're going to look at another example where we'd use multiple tools to machine a project. So we're just going to open up a second file. So from the project folder, we're going to open the Pocket Toolpath example2 file. So here we have a novelty license plate, and you can see just by looking at the vectors, we have lots of wide open spaces. We have spaces that are a lot closer together where the text is a lot smaller. And so straight away we can see we're going to need to approach this using probably more than 2 tools to machine this. So let's just switch over to our Toolpaths tab. We're going to go into the Pocket Toolpath. So first off, let's just remove all of the tools from our list. So here we're cutting down to 1/4 of an inch, and the first thing that we'd like to do is go ahead and select a tool. So we're going to use the select option from the list here. We're going to start by using a very large tool, so we'll look at the 1.5 inch end mill here, and then we'll go ahead and we'll just select that, and you can see it's been added to our list here. So then we'll go and select the vectors that we want to machine in between. So we'll just take those and those there. Okay, so we've got the Nevada and then the license plate number 2020, and then we've got the inner border here. And then we could go ahead and press Control and calculate, just so we can see the effect of that. So we can see that with that 1.5 inch tool, we're getting into all of these large areas, and you can see the result of that represented by this purple colour. You can also see where that tool can't fit in as well. And so at this stage, we'll go ahead and add in another tool, in which case we just simply use the select option here. Let's say we go for a 1/2 inch end mill this time. So we'll select that, and then again we'll just press Control and calculate, and you can see now we've managed to get into all of the areas that that larger tool could not, but there's still a few spaces, so in between the Nevada text, close to some of these letters and numbers inside of the 4 and around the 2020. And you can see that's where that 1/2 inch tool can't fit. So let's add in another tool. So we could use the select option here. We'll go for a 1/4 inch end mill, select that, press Control and calculate. Okay, so doing a little bit better. However, there's still some spaces where that 1/4 inch tool just can't quite get in between those characters. And so we'll just add in another tool. So we could use the select option and look at using an 1/8 inch end mill, select that, and then press Control and calculate. And we can see now that using that 1/8 inch tool, we're able to get in between all of those characters and fairly close to the actual letters that we've got within our job. So some important things to highlight here. With each individual tool, you're able to edit the passes for each one by selecting the tool and then using the Edit Passes option. Or if you wanted to edit the tool, you can use the Edit option as per the selected tool that you've got in the list. For example, let's say we wanted to take that 1/4 inch end mill, wanted to edit the passes where we only have one pass here. We can OK that, and that will apply that to just that particular tool. Earlier I mentioned that the way that the software organises the tools list is from largest to smallest, and this is also the way that we've actually manually selected these tools as well. But you'll notice on the right hand side we have these arrows, so we can actually alter the order here by using the arrow keys, where it will machine this one first, followed by this one, followed by this one, and so on. In this case, it doesn't make sense for me to do that, so I'm going to have that at 1.5 inches first, followed by the 1/2 inch tool, followed by the 1/4, followed by the 1/8. Now, in terms of the strategy, so for the largest tool, we've got this on the offset strategy, and then for each subsequent toolpath, it's also going to be applicable to the offset strategy. If we had the largest tool set to raster, then the subsequent tools will also be set to the offset strategy as well. So we're going to set that back to offset here, and then with each individual tool that we've got in our list, we can alter the cut direction on a per tool basis. We can also add in ramp plunge moves to each one of these tools just by selecting it and then applying the ramp plunge. And then if I click on the 8th, you'll see that checkbox is no longer ticked, and that's because we don't have ramp plunge moves associated for the 1/8 inch end mill tool. But if we go back to the quarter, we can see that the ramp plunge move is switched on. And so there really is a lot of control over the individual toolpaths that you have within your list, and what you can do with those. Okay, so we're just going to go with that, and we're just going to go ahead and press calculate. So let's just preview the toolpath. So we've got the first tool, which is the 1.5 inch tool, and then we could go ahead and preview that. Okay, so that's what that tool has managed to clear away. Okay, we're just going to undraw this animate preview here. Now we're going to take the second one, and we're going to preview this one to see what that looks like. And then we're going to take the third pocket toolpath, that's using the 1/4 inch tool. We're going to preview that. That's what we'll be left with. And then finally, the 1/8 inch pocket, we're going to look at that, and that's how that will turn out. We've got a profile toolpath that we've created previously. That's just going to cut our license plate out. And so you can see how that would look if we was to machine this project. And so, as I mentioned before, there are a number of different tool changes here. However, there is a lot of efficiency involved in this setup because you are using larger tools to clear at areas, and then you're using subsequent tools to clear areas that that larger previous tool could not get to. Okay, so we're going to look back at our first example over here. So let's just double click to open up this toolpath. We're just going to remove that 1/8 inch tool. We're just going to really simplify this. So if we go to the edit option for this tool, we're just going to make the pass step there at 1/4 inch. We'll go ahead and press OK. Now we're going to look at how we can add in a pocket allowance. Now it may be advantageous for us to apply a slight overcut or undercut to our pockets. And to do this, we can enter a pocket allowance. Now a positive number will undercut the size of the pocket by whatever value we put in here. And then a negative number will overcut, again, by the value that you've got in here. So let's have a look at an example where we apply an undercut. So we're going to do that by 0.05. So I'm just going to press Control and calculate here, just so we can take a look in the 2D view at what's happening. So if we just maximize that, we'll just press F to fit that to our screen. So you can see that our tool isn't going quite up to the vector that we've got, or the vectors that we have selected, and it's undercutting this part by the allowance that we've got here. Now, if we wanted to do a negative cut where we're overcutting, so we're going past the vector, we can simply add in a negative value. And so we can put in a negative 0.05 in there, and if we press Control and calculate, you can see that it's actually going past the vector by that same amount there. And so the nice thing about applying a positive or a negative pocket allowance is that you can actually change the size of the pocket without having to change or create brand new vectors. And so by applying these allowances, it may be advantageous to us if we wanted bigger or smaller pockets. Okay, so we're just going to close out of this form, and we're actually going to look at a different example where we're going to make use of the vector selection order. So we'll just close out here. We're going to go to File, Close, and then we're going to open an existing file, and from the project folder we're going to open up example 3. So let's switch over to the Toolpaths tab. Go into the Pocket toolpath. We're just going to select all of these vectors here and then go ahead and press Calculate. Okay, so we don't actually have any control over the order that the software machines these in, and it just picks what it considers to be the most efficient order. So you can see it's starting over here, it's going to machine this one, followed by this one, and it's going to work its way up, go right, and it's going to come down, and then it's going to go over to the right, and then go up, and then right, and then down again. But if I wanted to control the order that these are machined in, I can do, and I can do that by going back into the Pocket toolpath, and we can make use of the vector selection order. So let's just tile our windows. We're just going to deselect our vectors here. I'm going to use this option to use the vector selection order, in which case I can select the order that I would like to machine these in. So for example, we could go across to the right, up, over to the left, and then over to the right, and then up, and then over to the left. And then we could go ahead and then just press Control and Calculate, and you can see that the software has respected my vector selection order and it's applied that to this toolpath. And then this just really allows me to specify the order that I want to machine out a set of pockets. Okay, so we're going to look at the last option that we have available to use, and that is the vector selector. So this is the same selector that you'll see in most of the toolpath forms. So if we click on that, that's going to open up the vector selector form, and this really allows us to select vectors automatically based upon various criteria. Now, we're not going to go into this, but it is covered in a number of other tutorials, and I'll relate those to this particular tutorial. Okay, so we're just going to close out here, and that really completes this guide on the Pocket toolpath.